Hi, welcome to How to Beat Movies. I'm Alex, and in this video I will talk about a movie called Event Horizon, released in 1997, directed by Paul W.S. Anderson. Yes, the same Paul W.S. Anderson that some years later directed the horrible movies of the Resident Evil franchise, those with Mila Jovovich. But before we get started, I would like to ask you to hit the thumbs up icon below, subscribe and hit the bell icon, so you will be notified whenever a new video is available. That being said, let's go to the video. In 2040, the Event Horizon spacecraft was sent on a mission whose purpose was to investigate the borders of the solar system. However, Event Horizon disappeared while traveling through Neptune's orbit. 7 years later, in 2047, a new signal from the Event Horizon is captured on Earth, and then a rescue mission is prepared in order to find out what happened to the spaceship, and its crew, of course, who disappeared all these years. 8 people were part of this mission: the ship's captain named Miller, Lieutenant Stark, who is the second person in charge of the mission, Justin is the engineer, Peters is the doctor of the crew, Cooper is the lifesaver, so when someone is in trouble, he is the one you should call, and there is the ship's pilot, Smith. And last but not least, GJ, who is also a doctor. Now, in addition to the crew, there was Dr. William Wurr. He's the one responsible to explain to the team what the purpose of this mission is. The rescue spaceship is called Lewis and Clark, and we noticed that its crew weren't happy to be sent on this mission, because they were called for this mission totally out of the blue, and also they were on vacation. But anyway, Dr. William explains to them why they were called. He says that the Event Horizon spacecraft, after 7 years missing, sent a signal to Earth, and the location of the signal came from the orbit of Neptune. To the crew aboard, that seems absurd, because the Event Horizon had blown up in an accident, or at least that's what they knew about it. But Dr. William explains that this was made up to hide what happened. William says that the spaceship Event Horizon was built by himself, and it had an amazing technology, which was a core capable of distorting time and space, therefore creating a wormhole, which allowed travel across vast distance of the universe in a very short time. The scene where all of this is explained is pretty cool, cause think about it, this movie was released in 1997. The wormhole concept could have been awkward to the audience at the time, but in the movie they managed to present the concept in a pretty simple way, which is when William uses paper to represent time and space, and then he folds the paper and says, if I bend space-time with this distortion, I can make 2 points that are very distant from each other become closer, and that's what Event Horizon was built for. William explains that when the Event Horizon was traveling through Neptune's orbit, that's when they turned on the space-time distortion system, and since then, they haven't heard from the spacecraft again, until now. So their objective was to go to the Event Horizon to find out what happened to the spaceship and the crew on board. When the Lewis and Clark spaceship comes into Neptune's atmosphere, they face a huge storm on the gas planet. But after this mishap, they find Event Horizon. For a preliminary investigation on their aircraft, Captain Miller, Peters, and Justin were sent. Event Horizon was in a completely chaotic situation. On the floor of the spaceship were several devices. Captain Miller asks Dr. William over the radio what were those devices for. The doctor explains that there are bombs and they had been placed to destroy the spaceship and split it in two in a catastrophe situation. And with the spaceship split in two, the crew would be able to use Event Horizon's life-saving decks to escape safely and sound. And that's something that will be relevant to the plot later, so keep that in mind. Peters manages to retrieve the ship's log. They expected the log to help them to know what happened to the crew of the Event Horizon. Whatever their fate was, it wasn't good because they found dead bodies floating around the Event Horizon. Their appearance was terrifying. Meanwhile, Justin ended up in the core room, where the device that created time distortion was placed. It was a sphere surrounded by gigantic rings. As I mentioned before, 3 people were investigating the event horizon and the rest of the crew was on Lewis and Clark. Those who were at Lewis and Clark could see what their teammates were doing through images that were broadcast to them. But suddenly some weird happens and the images that Justin was broadcasting go off the air. So what Justin saw after that, the others couldn't see. And in this very moment, the core in front of Justin turns into a kind of liquid sphere. For some unknown reason, Justin decides to put his hand on that strange sphere and ends up being sucked into it. Justin was attached to a cable, and at the other end of the cable was Cooper, who, seeing his friend being pulled, realizes that he is in trouble and decides to help him. The liquid sphere creates a shock wave that spreads through the spaceship, and the shock wave shakes Lewis and Clark, causing a lot of damage. It is important to point out that Justin ended up coming out of that liquid sphere so he could be saved by Cooper. Justin is taken to the medical bay after that, but he's in a catatonic state. Lewis and Clark suffered a lot of breakdowns, and for that, the entire crew was forced to go aboard in the event horizon. They needed to understand what sort of damage Lewis and Clark had and how to fix it. After all, Lewis and Clark was the only ship capable of getting them back to Earth. The Event Horizon wasn't capable of doing it because it was badly damaged. And also the communication systems were off, so there was no way for them to ask Earth for help. Their only option would be to fix Lewis and Clark. Another problem is that due to recent events, they were left with low oxygen levels. They needed to fix that as well, otherwise Lewis and Clark would run out of air before 20 hours. These guys were in a hell of a situation. Cooper reports what he saw to the others, you know what happened to Justin and the core that had turned into a liquid sphere. But Dr. Willen doesn't believe one single word. He says this is impossible because if that had happened, it would mean that the gravity thruster was turned on, and it just couldn't happen out of the blue like that. Dr. Willen is that kind of guy who, when a lot of weird things start happening, he keeps saying there must be a rational explanation to all of this, which is the kind of thing that makes you angry while watching these movies. But to be fair, I would be this skeptical guy in real life, so I won't judge too much. Anyway, back to the story. Many characters see a lot of strange things in the Event Horizon. An example is Peters, who sees her son with his leg all torn apart. The movie had established that she had a paraplegic son who was on Earth, which makes this vision quite unsettling for her. All characters starts to see things that reflect their traumas from the past. That was the case with Peters, and the same happens with Dr. William, who keeps seeing his wife on the spaceship even though she took her life years ago. And also there's Captain Miller, who keeps seeing a guy with his body on fire. Turns out this guy was someone who Miller worked with in the past. He was part of Miller's crew and died in an accident where his body was consumed by flames, and Miller, incapable to help his soldier, left the guy behind, but he never forgave himself for it. What is curious is that he hadn't told this story to anyone, but Event Horizon knew that and was using it against Miller, like it was using the fears of the rest of the crew against them as well. In this movie, the ship is a character. It is an entity with evil intentions, and its influence begins to affect everyone's mind, which creates more confusion and chaos. After Justin was sent to the medical bay, hours later he wakes up and decides to take an insane action. Justin goes to the spaceship's compression unit. He planned to open it, but if he did so, to use very scientific terms, he was going to be fucked up. It's not a good idea to throw yourself into the vacuum of space without a suit on, my friend. The other crew members go to where Justin was and try to convince him not to open the compression unit, and he keeps muttering some things. He says that if everyone could see what he saw, they wouldn't try to stop him. When he pushes the button to open the unit, it starts a countdown for the unit to be opened, and then Justin seems to realize what he did and even regret doing it, but now it's too late. Or not, because Captain Miller, who was outside the spaceship, was informed of what was going on with Justin, and so he moved to try to stop the worst possible scenario. He was going to pick up Justin when the unit opened and take him back to the spaceship as soon as possible. It was the only chance to help Justin to survive. And that is precisely what Captain Miller does. We see Justin's body suffer the effects of the vacuum. His veins swell and blood starts to come out of his nose, eyes, ears, and who knows what else. Still, thanks to the captain's action, Justin was taken back to the ship to receive medical care. He didn't die, but he was badly injured. With all these weird things happening, we can presume that the characters were not very excited to continue this mission. I mean, most of them, because Dr. William was in favor of staying on Event Horizon to find out what happened. And well, they find out. Peters and Lieutenant Stark finally get full access to Event Horizon's log. We see footage of the crew suffering like they were in hell. The images are completely disturbing, and all the crew members watch everything. And then Captain Miller says, "Okay, that's it. I'm going home, fuck this spaceship." But Dr. William doesn't seem happy about it. He was still obsessed to carry on with the mission and knowing all the details about Event Horizon. At this point, it was clear that the spacecraft used the gravitational thruster to go to a very distant place in the universe. Dr. William was obsessed to know what place it was. During the movie, they talk a lot about hell. The idea is that the spacecraft has gone to hell, or that it went to a dimension of pure evil and horror. And when Event Horizon came back, it brought something with it, the darkness. And that was enough to scare the shit out of most people aboard, except for Dr. William, who was more amazed by all of this. Lewis and Clark had already been fixed, so Miller ordered his team to move to evacuate the Event Horizon. He planned to get away from the spaceship and then launch a missile at it, to ensure that the evil in there was destroyed. Dr. William didn't like that and decided to prevent Miller's plan. With that, a few people ended up dying in the process of leaving the ship. For example, Peters, as she was preparing to leave, and she has a vision of her son and decides to follow him, which leads her to her death. Dr. William used several bombs to destroy the spaceship Lewis and Clark, therefore destroying the crew's only way to escape. In the explosion, Smith dies, and something very curious happened with Cooper. He was out of the ship fixing something and he was caught up in the explosion and was launched adrift into space. But he uses his suit's oxygen and some sort of propulsion to get back to the Event Horizon. GJ is also killed by Dr. William, who at this point was completely possessed by the Event Horizon. At this time, only 4 people are still alive: Captain Miller, Lieutenant Stark, Cooper, and Justin, even though Justin was unconscious. Since the ship that would take them home was destroyed, Miller hatches a new plan. He was going to use those explosives I mentioned before to blow up the Event Horizon, and then he would use the life tags that were at the front of the spaceship. From the life tags, they could send a signal to Earth, so a rescue team would be dispatched to save them. After that, they would just have to wait until the rescue team arrived in the cryogenic unit. With that in mind, Miller dispersed Cooper and Stark. It happens that Miller ends up finding Dr. William in the core room of the Event Horizon. William is naked, don't ask me why, and his body was burned and covered with scars, and he plans to turn on the space distortion system of the Event Horizon and take everyone towards the dimension of pain, chaos, and evil where the spaceship have gone before. The crew's fate would be something far worse than hell, unless they find a way to prevent it from happening. Dr. William didn't realize that Miller had already set several bombs in the spaceship, so when he puts his hands on the detonator, he blows up the Event Horizon and with that eliminates the crazy Dr. William and of course Miller himself. Cooper and Lieutenant Stark go to the life decks. Both get into the hibernation pods and wait until the rescue team arrives. A few weeks later, we see an explorer come to the life deck. He first pulls Lieutenant Stark out of her hibernation unit, and when he opens his helmet visor, we see it's the crazy Dr. William. But calm down, because that was just a hallucination of Lieutenant Stark. The reality is that the rescue team had arrived and they were only there to help the survivors. And in the end, there were 3 left alive: Lieutenant Stark, Cooper, and Justin. Yeah, even though Justin had suffered several injuries and traumas, he didn't die. Event Horizon is a great movie, and Paul W.S. Anderson is very good when it comes to directing this movie. There is no sign whatsoever that he would do that shitty Resident Evil franchise in the future. Perhaps the only legit Paul W.S. Anderson is the Paul W.S. Anderson before Mila Jovovich. I don't know if you guys agree with that. That's it guys, see you in the next video and bye bye.